and then we'll get started. So, everybody, hi. I'm AJ Mullican. I have written I've got a sci-fi dystopian series in the works that has the first book out in 2018, and the second one is coming out in like 2.5 weeks. It's the Abnormal series. Most of you probably haven't heard of it because it's a very small pub that's running it, but I enjoyed writing it and talking with Theresa about it in her book as well earlier before everyone logged in. So let's just start by going around the table. Everyone talk a little bit about yourself. We'll start, I've got Theresa here as the next one, and then we'll just kind of go down the line and say hi to everybody. So Theresa, go ahead. Yeah.
So my name's Theresa. I'm a spec fiction writer, which means that I write anything that is sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, horror, anything that's just not contemporary. I feel like alt history might fall underneath that umbrella as well. My publisher published Warehouse Dreams in July of 2020, right during the pandemic. Yay! And Warehouse Dreams is about the faculty at a rundown school for psychokinetics and telepaths. So it's really fun. It's a very dystopian world where these students that are at the school really are not wanted by society, and society has said, we don't want you, please go away, and made it so that they can't get jobs or schooling or loans or housing or anything else. So things are pretty dark for these groups called wilds. And but the school is offering kind of a ray of hope for these teenagers to get them a high school education, train them how to use their abilities, and then teach them how to hide so that in the future they might be able to break out of this wildlife. So it's fun. I'm also a podcaster for Semi-Sages of the Pages. We are a podcast for writers. Our tagline is, we don't know where we're going, but we're on an adventure. And it's all about our journey with publishing, querying, rejections, in addition to us talking about the craft and things that we've discovered. I have a paranormal romance coming out in April called River City Widows. It's based in East Sacramento, and it's about a widow whose stepdaughter brings home a Ouija board from college. And then, all sorts of funny things happen in the house. And then I have a creative nonfiction piece coming out also in April. I co-authored with S. Faxon, and it's about the ghosts aboard the Star of India, which is a tall ship in San Diego Harbor. So it's very, very haunted, and everyone has lots and lots of fun stories about that. So it's been busy. I'm excited for this year.
All right, and Alex?
I'm Alex Gizerati. I'm an author, artist, and photographer. I write sci-fi and urban fantasy. My latest book has just come out, Supernatural Suspense. It's Reflections in Darkness. I have my own podcast as well. I post my photography on Instagram. I've been on just about every social media you can find out there, and I'm currently finally learning about promotion for your books. So all my stories and stuff, okay, great. I'm book 5 in urban fantasy, so now I get to explore this new world of reaching out and finding readers.
Okay. And Emily and Katz.
Yes, you'll see them pop into the window quite often. So I'm Emily Shore, and I write in YA and upper YA with crossover appeal in pretty much every genre that is out there, though I'm not actually published yet in every genre. But I've pretty much done it all, touched that genre because it's very challenging. But just a little bit about myself. I'm an Enneagram 8 for those who like Enneagram. I am a Slither-claw, so I'm pretty much split right down the middle between Slytherin and Ravenclaw, which means I can take over the world and plot how to get away with it. So, yeah, very Disney obsessed. There's a little bit about just some of the things that I love. And my top genre to read and write in happens to be fantasy, but my latest fantasy series is not yet published. But my dystopian one is. So I wrote an upper YA dystopian. This is the first book, The Aviary, and this is the second book, The Garden, and I have the whole series available. It's been published with a small press. Clean Team Publishing is the name. And basically it's a very dark and riveting dystopian about a young woman named Serenity, who's 16 years old, and she is taken from her family and put on an auction block to the highest bidder. And she ends up in a museum called the Aviary, which is bird themed, and girls go by names of Peacock and Nightingale, and Serenity becomes the top exhibit there called the Swan. So it's actually an anti-trafficking dystopian meant to raise awareness to the issue of trafficking, to guide and teach youth about this issue. And there's like discussion questions and a resources page to help with engaging teens on that issue. And this kind of all started 12 years ago when I was in Germany and I learned about the red light district. And I set about a decades-long journey of volunteering and researching and learning from trafficking survivors, and just doing whatever I could, training, getting trauma informed. And a lot of that just had to do with my background as a Me Too, and my heart kind of clung on to that environment and wanting to do what I could to raise awareness and work towards prevention. So a portion of the proceeds of my books does go back to trafficking rescue locally and internationally. So, and I am having a reduced rate tomorrow for International Day of the Woman. But if anybody wants to go beyond that reduced rate, everything will be donated back to a local survivor-led organization. So that's just a little bit about my dystopian tale for today. And I have a paranormal romance series available as an indie published series, and trying to gain a readership for my up and coming fantasy series. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And Stephen.
I'm a spec fic writer. I write across the spec fic field. I'll have 11 books out this year. My Tinker series actually is where I have what I call a realistic utopia and a dystopia both in the series. United Grid Regions is the realistic utopia where they're trying to do things in new ways. The dystopia is the United Grid Regions, which is governed by corporate feudalism, and they're the two high-tech societies that have held on, and everywhere else is the Darklands, which is basically subsistence farming without electricity.
Cool. All right. So first topic I want to talk about is what is dystopia to you? Because I mean, we all think about, the horrible apocalyptic world has ended thing, but there's different varieties of dystopia. I was talking with Theresa before we started about how in my books, it's a dystopian society where the upper class sees control of even the reproduction of the lower class, to the point of genocide almost, to prevent them from gaining power. So the world in between the advanced cities is kind of that apocalyptic wastelandish type world, but the cities themselves are very advanced and modernized, almost utopian. If you are in the upper society, it's a little utopian. So kind of like what is your take on dystopia and the spectrum which dystopia takes place? And we could go round table, kind of go around.
Sure.
Whoever wants
points.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. You're up.
All right, I'm up. All right. So as we were talking about, our definitions of dystopian are pretty similar, upper class versus lower class. I've got the wilds, who are, they're born to regular people without telepathy and psychokinesis. So basically, one day as a wild, you come down for breakfast as a teenager and you're like, Dad, what's going on at work? Are you about to get fired? Because you suddenly can like read his thoughts. And think about that as a parent, your child comes down and can read your thoughts. That's absolutely terrifying, you know. And what if you're like, hey, for the 15th time I've told you to do the bloody litter box, and then all of a sudden a fork just flies through the air and embeds next to your head? Again, that would be absolutely terrifying. So what does a society do about that? Well, in my world, they go, see ya. And parents turn their kids in for institutionalization. Parents will try to hide their kids. They will try to be like, just don't use it. It's fine. Just be good. Just don't use the telepathy part, even though it's an ingrained part of them and they can't not use it. So as I said before, there's a school that is there to try to help them, but there's also another class of people, and they're called Breds, and they, their parents, and they're through several generations now, but their parents paid for their genetic code, and they have paid thousands to millions of dollars to create a child who is not only telepathic and psychokinetic, but is also intelligent and charming and charismatic and gorgeous. And these people are taking control. And they have said to the wilds, for the most part, we don't want to deal with you. You're not our problem. You're somebody else's problem. We're going to focus on taking power, and we're going to hope that you guys just kind of disappear. So we're kind of where when this book takes place, there's kind of this tug and pull between these different classes. So that's my definition of dystopian.
Okay. And Alex, how about you? We'll just go round table. I think it works so well. So
Okay. For me, my story, the book that I'm coming out with next is a sci-fi tale called Drake's Orb. It does not have a dystopian feel to it. It's very set in sci-fi. However, it comes with a backstory that I've been putting together, and that does have its own dystopian roots. And although it's not where there's an upper class and lower class, it does have a basis in the collapse of society, and it has a very it almost seems like something that is possible today. I don't know how possible it could be, but what takes place is someone releases a computer virus that pretty much anything that is being concealed online is instead duplicated and shared throughout the world. And that pretty much takes every government, every leader, every person's secret and shows it to their people. And that pretty much creates a worldwide civil war, which collapses, the entire society all around the world. To do that, it's pretty much like the only way to come out of it is, you have all leaders pretty much fleeing for their lives if they're not killed outright. And there has to be a new government, there has to be new people in place. And that story, which I've been working on, it won't be out for years. It's got too many pieces of it that have to be in place. But yeah, it has all these, you have to rebuild society from the bottom up. And with this virus, which I have it so it's ingrained with my current story, it's like, okay, they have to have freedom of information. So for me, the captain of the ship is from a former military. He's in a civilian research vessel, and everything he sees, he can actually access everyone's files, but they can access his as well. So he's coming in from an outsider's point of view. They're coming in from, okay, you come from this strict government discipline, so they don't trust him to begin with. And that's kind of a little bit of, okay, it comes from the past. It's like you don't trust anyone in charge, and the higher up in the authority chain you get, the less they trust you. So it's more of a, you have to understand who these people are, where they come from, why they're so untrusting. It's kind of like Star Trek, except you don't just trust, the hierarchy of command. Instead, you trust the people next to you more than you do anyone who's above you. And that's always a very interesting way to look at it. But from the very beginning, it's like, yeah, the entire world, fell apart because of secrets and because of things that were being concealed from the people. So for me, dystopian is always just the collapse of society for one reason or another, either zombie apocalypse or government that suppresses the people, or any kind of ways of taking a different class and treating them as inferior. It always results in the same thing. Everyone turns on one another, and the only way to get out of it is to find connections with one another.
Okay. And yeah, and we kind of got out of order because poor Emily got offline for a little bit there. Stephen, if you don't mind, you're in order on my screen, but if you don't mind if I let Emily go, since we're kind of going in the same order we did before. Okay. So
Sure.
Emily, talking about your definition of dystopia.
Yes, I love dystopian genre in general because it can span so many different genres, so many different subgenres and universes. But for the purposes of my dystopian, I kind of led with the concept of starting 12 years ago when I began writing. What would the world look like, especially in America, in the USA? What would it look like if prostitution was legalized all across the board? Not the Nordic model, which is something I'm a proponent of, which is legalizing or decriminalizing the selling of sex, but not the buying of sex. So I discussed that in my discussion questions. But what would it look like if it was completely and totally legalized, and then throw it like 150 to 100 years into the future? So you have basically you have the different, of course, income inequality. So you have the streets, and that would be the glass district, which is supposed to be symbolic of the red light district. And so you have that side with just the lower income and more poverty stricken arenas. And then you have the more corporate elite side, which is the museums. And you have different themed museums across the country. And then there are some that are higher than others, some that are lower than others, and some have a higher paying clientele. And the higher amount of money you pay, the more access to the most popular girls, the most popular commodity of exhibits that you gain. And then the temple is the epicenter of this trafficking world, and that would be the top mega tower of a museum. So I go into that in book 3 and book 4. But how this world came about, and I'm going to my little section so I can just give an excerpt. And activists were more common during the early days of legalization, no longer. Time-bred conformity, then normality, and commodities cheapened. And now any opposition is silenced because the families won't have their commodities cheapened in any way. The money trail always leads back to the families, where blood ties are thick and mandatory. They filled their pockets to the brim with lobbyists in the early days, marketing legalization to media moguls who promoted it to the Hollywood elite. Of course, more family, all corrupt politicians serving their fewer regulations are imposed. This was actually based off of years of research and survivor testimony of what legalization has looked like in other countries, as the former mayor of Amsterdam testified that the mafia, the families in my book, came and set up shop, and the red light district became a very big crime hub, and the family swept in and took advantage of that. So that was kind of a big theme for my dystopian, and the families actually infiltrating Congress and kind of taking that pro-prostitution narrative to all the corporate side and the media and the Hollywood elite side. And in my world, the actual age of sex work has been lowered to 16. So you have girls as young as 12 that are being pimped out on the streets with fake IDs and everything, which is already going on in the strip clubs and in brothels and everywhere with fake IDs. I've actually worked with survivors who started on the streets when they were as young as 13. So it's a definitive problem, but I was able to spin this narrative in such a way that was PG-13 without any graphic violence. I have references in there, but since it's all seen through the eyes of a 16-year-old girl, and she goes from just absolutely hating everything about her world and her environment and starts to empathize with the girls around her and wanting to advocate for them and standing up for them and using her position of privilege to do so. So that was a big part of her growth throughout the book, and hoping to carry that perception of that these girls are human beings and they don't deserve to be treated like commodities. So
Okay. And Stephen, your dystopia.
Okay, well, I have a kind of a general view of dystopia, and I'm just going to read it off my notes. High hopes and ideals fallen and pushed aside. That's a major part of the culture. Disparity in wealth, with an elitist class who live like gods and everybody else struggling to hold them up and not getting a fair share of the pie. And I'm not a big S socialist. I'm a small S socialist and a small C capitalist, just to make that point so nobody goes nuts. Finger pointing, that you always have the elite in charge pointing their finger and saying, they are the source of all your problems, normally to an outside. And all societies have done this, but it's a matter of degree. You look, the US and Russia had each other to point fingers at for years, and they put up a smokescreen that blinded the populace to a lot of the shenanigans. In Canada, we did it with the French and the English. Media that polarizes, where you do not have honest reporting, but you have the reporting of opinion. A populace at odds against itself. And I'm sorry, but we are in a dystopia. When you look at it, we have fallen into a dystopic sort of society. Not a really bad one, but we're on that continuum. In my work, I have the United Grid Regions, which is a marginally sustainable dystopia because energy is the commodity in the Tinker's World series. It's scarce, and if you have it, you can run technology. If you don't, you can't. And because the United Grid Regions are a corporate feudal system, the shareholders run the society, and they run it to support themselves like any corporation would. They're interested in their own wealth, but not the society in general. Earmarks of a dystopia: injustice, exalted few, masses downtrodden, and easily fixed issues are ignored. So that's kind of my view of dystopias in general.
I would have to agree that we are kind of in a downgrading dystopia right now. I feel like it's starting to slope more. And reality is starting to become almost more what a lot of the science fiction, spec fic, dystopian fictions are. It's becoming closer to what people have been theorizing or making up, for decades. And now it's starting to become almost the fiction has almost become reality.
Yeah,
I recently
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I recently watched Fahrenheit 451, and what struck me was not a week before I saw a post on Facebook about a school teacher who was exalting the fact that she had gotten a piece of classic literature banned from the school library. And she thought she had done a great thing because she was supporting a feminist idea and this was a misogynist piece. Well, it's a historical piece, and it spoke to that time period. And this is an educator who was exulting in the fact that she banned a book. That's
Right.
It's outrageous.
Yeah. I feel like good sci-fi is a warning. It's a warning of what could happen. And I think sci-fi writers from the very beginning have been saying, hey, heads up, I can see the direction that we're going. And this is what I see might happen. So I'm going to fictionalize what might happen and be careful. It's a warning. And I think dystopian novels, especially Emily's, is absolutely a warning.
Alex?
Oh yes, definitely. Like you said, Fahrenheit 451. For more people who watch the shows and movies today, there's that V for Vendetta. Anyone who reads the classic literature in 1984, you get to see all these warnings, and people who actually understand when you give power over your lives to corruption, it may be something that's being pushed on you, but by the time you realize it's the wrong thing, your entire society is no longer free to live their lives and do things, to pursue their own interests, and you have to follow the the company line and always be afraid of Big Brother, and it's just a constant struggle for authors to understand that line is always there, and so many people don't realize it. And like you said, today we have all these things that in 1984 would have been beyond their ability, we now have available. Where in that one it's like, okay, the television is looking at you. Now we carry our own little tracking devices in our pocket everywhere, and all it takes is a little switch in the algorithm, and that camera or that microphone is on 24/7 to monitor everybody, where they are, what they say, and any kind of double speak, as it was listed, is immediately attacked, and people will disappear. So yeah, it's a slippery slope that we're constantly having to look out for.
Yeah. And Emily, you've kind of already gone into what today's dystopia is with some of your research that you've gone over. So you kind of have delved right deep into the modern day dystopia with your research before you even started writing about the future.
Yeah, it was when I started writing it, I never once had the inkling that it would be considered passing the law of making sex work legal would never be fathomed in the United States, but it's actually been brought up by the majority. A lot of times it is actually the pro-pimps, the pimp legalization, because they have all the money and they want it legal so that way they get off the hook. And they actually will pay girls to testify or threaten or coerce and say, yes, we want sex work to be passed. We are sex workers. There's a big pro-sex work narrative going on in our country. And I don't deny the voices of sex workers. I just want to make that clear. I will totally listen and affirm those voices, but I do also listen and prioritize trafficking survivor voices, those who were put out on the streets at a young age. I look at the research, I look at the overall truth and facts of the situation versus just taking one person's opinion, and especially look at trafficking survivor testimony because they have been out of that environment. They came out of that environment and they are in a stable and healthy place with rehabilitation and restoration, and so they have that personal firsthand experience, but they are in a better place of processing. But overall, it's important to look at the facts, the studies of what is come on in other countries that have passed sex work versus other countries that have, say, passed the Nordic model, which is Sweden originated the Nordic model, and they were able to cut prostitution in half and help reduce rates of trafficking, especially of younger girls and boys. So other countries in Europe are starting to adopt the Nordic model, which is very positive. So like France is one example that has adopted the Nordic model. In my state of Minnesota, we have adopted kind of the Nordic model's little sister, and we call it the safe harbor law. If anybody wants to research that, I won't go into that. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind journey of over a decade. And I am trained under a few international organizations, but I actually don't do any more speaking since COVID shutdown happened, and I am high risk. So I'm not able to go to festivals or speaking events anymore, unfortunately. So instead, I'm just kind of delayed that, and I'm working on my education in domestic abuse advocacy and anti-sexual violence advocacy overall. And that's I'd much rather prefer to do crisis counseling one-on-one with individuals. I had the honor of sheltering a single mom in crisis last year, and I learned so much from her and was just so proud to walk alongside her in her journey of leaving her abuser. So I just, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic. So
okay, yeah, and you brought up a good point in that I wonder sometimes if the pandemic hasn't escalated the dystopian reality that's becoming now. I feel like the restrictions being placed on us because of the pandemic, everything's just kind of like snowballing. When it was on a like slow gradual, I think it helped push it over the hill and get that ball rolling towards a more real dystopia in our current situation, just by the fact of the situation of trying to cope with this worldwide pandemic, as it's becoming, again, fiction made reality, which I think is kind of a sad thing, because we can't go out and do things, but it's almost not the government, as so many people had predicted, we'll say, through their works, but it's almost that nature in itself and the disease itself that is stopping us from doing what we want to do. I mean, the governments are mandating it, yes, but it is the disease process that is forcing the mandates.
And I really appreciate what Stephen had to say about just the polarization and ideals with, the media and society being pitted against one another. We're definitely seeing all the repercussions of that over the past year. And then also the just stark difference between the elite and then the lower class. And we're seeing a very fierce income inequality with that. So I really appreciate that aspect of dystopia and recognizing that that's very ticking multiple boxes with our current society now.
Yeah, I think the pandemic absolutely escalated that. And we're going to see that for years to come,
The really scary part is with this pandemic, this is a fairly mild pandemic.
Yep.
It is. And virologists have been predicting this for years. And they're predicting that there are going to be others. Just imagine Ebola with a 98% death rate going airborne. We need to be careful.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually had COVID at the beginning of the year. It was a very mild case of it, but yeah, it's kind of like, even with taking the precautions and wearing the mask everywhere I went, wearing the mask at work, because I do work at an eye care center. So, we still see patients, because you can't do eye care over the phone. You can't do telemed for that. That doesn't work. So, still in person working, and it's definitely, even taking precautions, you still, it still can happen.
big triggering event.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
Has anybody written a pandemic themed dystopia? I'm just curious. Okay.
Tinker's
No.
Plague.
No,
They-
I wrote a zombie one. Does that count?
yeah, I work in healthcare. I don't ever want to live this year again, so I definitely don't want to write about it.
Yeah. Living it is a little close to, a little too close to that. Yeah. It's crazy.
I had one person describe Tinker's Plague as an apocalypse in a post-apocalyptic world, because the world is post-apocalyptic, and then the plague gets taken out of an old bio research facility and spreads through the population of an area, and that is the current apocalypse that my tinker finds himself in the middle of.
Alex, do you have any we've been a little quiet. We kind of been talking a lot here. What are your thoughts on the pandemic as far as it relates to dystopia and in either fiction or our current reality?
Well, definitely it has all the earmarks of what we've read over the years on dystopian societies, and how all the lookouts that you have to do, the lockdowns, and every time you see a elitist or politician saying everybody needs to shut down their business, shut down their lives, go lock themselves up, and they're like, okay, you have a mansion and pretty much a fully stocked home that can keep you there comfortably for years. Most people before all this happened didn't have enough food to last a week.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, a lot of people are without jobs, a lot of people are without any way of getting out, and the people who depend on others, the elderly, or some people who are very sick, all of a sudden you're being told you're not allowed to interact, and you're not allowed anyone to be near you. Is like, you have to understand these people who have the means don't understand, if you go down far enough, there's a very serious need that needs to be addressed. And until we actually can help those who can't help themselves, you can't tell everybody just shut everything down and ignore the repercussions of the mental health, and the the economic impact that has. And somehow we're pushing that more and more, and I'm like, okay, we have some awareness, but there's a lot of you know big advocates for let's just maintain lockdowns indefinitely until this is over. And it's like, well, no, you have to actually look at what's going on with people.
Mm.
Mental health is at an all-time low. Suicides are growing terribly right now. We have to decide, do we really want to lock down to that degree? Can't we find some middle ground where businesses can open, people can return to their lives to some point? Otherwise you're gonna create this like you said, a mild dystopian, but still it's not something that is going to be looked at as a sustainable society. You're gonna force people to lose their livelihoods, lose their any kind of a chance at having a better future for themselves. People who had businesses, or family-owned companies for years now have nothing. They had to shut their doors, and they can't open again. So yeah, all the elements are there. It's a constant reminder, especially for
Yeah.
those of us who have read all these books over the years. Like, oh
Yeah.
goodness, we actually have people who just jumped in both feet to say, okay, let's do all this oversight and tracking, and if you don't lock yourself in from society, we're going to have people come and tackle you and arrest you and drag you away just because you didn't wear a mask, even though you were the only person for in a hiking trail for 20 yards, or you went and sat in a park and you were the only one on the park bench, and nobody else was there. It's like, okay, you have to, a warning is fine. Telling people, okay, this is an area, like high impact, a lot of people have gotten sick in this area. Just give people the chance to actually respond to these things. Instead, it's like all of a sudden we went from a free society to do what you want to police and all these authority figures just coming down and, okay, you didn't do this, so we're arresting you.
I
Well,
think
at the same
we
time,
have to be careful and remember, like I have friends in South Africa. They can't even get in the car without a mask. Like we know people that have been arrested for just not having a mask
Oh, poor thing.
they're in their
Yeah.
car and they're actually driving in their car, and the freedom we still have in this country, or mandated that only, like, that's what's going on. Had severe lockdowns, and I've got friends that are all over the world, and in Australia and the UK, and I just look at what they're doing for lockdown compared to what we're doing, and I'm like, I look at the different rates and everything. I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought we were in a lockdown, but we haven't been in a lockdown at all, really. And I live in a blue state. So, and I've been quarantined the whole time. The only time I go out of the house is to get groceries. And that's 99% of the time, that's my husband doing that. So, because I am high risk. And if I'm not at high risk of contracting COVID, but if I do contract COVID, I'm pretty much dead. So that's the issue with me. So, so I do appreciate people taking precautions, wearing masks. It's just one way to love your neighbor and do unto others, and remember that, there are people out there like me that risk, high risk of death, with COVID, and my babies could have the same type of medical disorder that I do. So thank you.
I have to say, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wonder how much, and Stephen may be going in this direction too, and it was something Alex said. I wonder how much information or lack of information or control of information ties into the creation of the dystopian. Because as I've said, I work in healthcare. I've seen how the information, as we've learned more about COVID, has morphed, but many people are still right back where we started, and either saying, I don't accept that the information has morphed, or saying that people are lying because the information has morphed, or saying everyone's lying, I refuse to do anything with this, it's all completely phony.
Yeah,
So-
well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I agree with you 100% that people don't clue in that science is a constantly evolving thing. And this bug came out of nowhere. And suddenly we were looking at it and saying, okay, if you do this and this and this and this, you should be okay. Oh no, we have more facts now. We've researched it more. Our understanding transmorphs. So we are giving you new rules. And people to have a natural rebellion against having the rules changed on them. And a lot of people just aren't understanding that this is the best we know how to do right now. And tomorrow we'll know better. It's sort of like with the vaccines. The first vaccine that came out had to be stored at something like minus 70 degrees Celsius. Now there's one out that can be stored at minus 40, which is a lot easier to maintain. And there's another one that just came out that's not as effective, but I think that it's up around a room temperature, isn't it? Or is it around zero?
It's a lot, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, so, but that's the same sort of dynamic of we're getting better at it, but we haven't got it licked yet.
Yeah. Now I want to touch on something Theresa said a little bit back. She mentioned, and I feel almost the same way. She mentioned how she doesn't want to write about the pandemic because she's living in the pandemic. I'm sick of reality. I want to go write about something that's not real for a little bit. And how has the way that our society is gearing more towards almost real dystopia, how has that affected your writing? I know I have been writing a lot more paranormal romance. It has nothing to do with any kind of pandemic or dystopia right now. Well, a little bit in one series I'm doing, but it's a lot less real, a lot less could happen, and the dystopian series that I'm writing, I working on it less and less because it's like, oh, this is so much like work, so much like reality. Like I'm a little tired of it. So how is it affecting your writing, living in a dystopia, you know?
I'll start off. I think we've been, honestly, I think the pandemic has accelerated our dystopian reality, but I think it was already there. I wrote Warehouse Dreams before the pandemic, and I pulled in elements of what I was seeing. I pulled in elements of that, of what happens when certain individuals get arrested. I pulled in the idea of school shootings, because to me it is unfathomable to shoot a child. But I ended up using that. I have this wonderfully horrific scene where a bunch of students are running from a mob and somebody points a gun at them and is willing to kill them because they are so terrified of their abilities. So I pulled that into Warehouse Dreams. So in terms of the pandemic affecting writing dystopia, it really hasn't. I've been working on the sequel, and I'm looking around and pulling in elements of what we're seeing into that story as well. Yeah.
Yeah. For
Anybody
me,
else feel? Go ahead.
for me, the one thing that the whole lockdown and the pandemic did was it, because my employer did allow me to work from home. It gave me a little bit more time to finish the latest urban fantasy book that I had, so that I got it published at the end of last year, which is a very good thing. I couldn't find the time before then, so that for me that allowed me to do it. I have not been wanting to put anything about the lockdown, the pandemic. For me, I like to see the resolution. So I would prefer to see how it all ends when this is behind us and we've got, you know, everything back to normal, and we can say, okay, we now have, you know, no worry about this anymore. And then I can go back and say, okay, let's see how it all started, how it all ended, and everything in between, and then see if I can pick and choose something in there and create a story from it. But trying to put it out now, I don't see that being, you know, at least for me, being able to be done well, because trying to claim that I know what's going on when, like you said, things are evolving on a daily basis. You know, every time something new happens, or new variant or new change in the lockdowns, or new, you know, different places open or different places locked down even more tightly, you know, you can't predict it. And if you say, okay, this is definitely the way the world is, and by the time your story comes out, it's like, no, it's not. Everyone's going to be telling you, no, okay, that you were totally wrong, didn't make any sense. You thought you knew it, but you didn't. And it just seems like, okay, I'm going to wait till, you know, we're at the end of this, and then I can decide, okay, if I do, I'll just pick this little snippet and I'll know what the result is ahead of time. And I can actually, you know, extrapolate from that what my characters could do, what the story could be, how I could put it into a fantasy realm or more extreme pandemic type of situation. People will recognize it. But right now, I'm keeping it as far away from that as possible, sticking to my, you know, the sci-fi and the urban fantasy, supernatural suspense, just to avoid putting out something and trying to say, yes, this is the way it would be. And it's like, no, even I can see how quickly things change from you know, day to day, week to week. You know, things that no one from the beginning of last year could have predicted how we would have ended the year. So yeah, it helped me with you know, working from home for the first time, and I could actually get things done and, you know, save on commutes and whatnot. But to pursue it as a story element, I'm going to just continue gathering information as I go, and look forward to the time when this is behind us and we can all kind of openly you know, head out and enjoy the day without worry about any kind of, you know, issues with, you know, viruses or variants or anything that's coming out.
Stephen, Emily, have either of you, your writing been affected, do you think, by adversely by the reality of what's going on?
Not overly, because I'm kind of in a stage in my career where I'm writing a lot of sequels. So it's sort of, okay, I'm obliged to write a sequel for this, and that more or less defines where the book's going to start. And I've already done my plague piece, so I wanted to move on to other things.
Okay.
In a couple of years, it would.
Yes and no. When the lockdown first happened, I was going to school at the time, and I was literally just about to be hired by a place by Barnes and Noble where I used to work. I was really thrilled to get back into working again. And COVID took all of that away from me. And all of a sudden my children are at home because the schools are shut down. And that was really rough on me because I was really eager to have both my children in school full time and not have them at home and in my hair all the time. Summer was fine because we got out and everything, but we live in Minnesota and it's a very cold climate. But one of the things that happened was far more interaction on social media. You know, our lives are so much connected right now via social media because we're not meeting in person. So I'm on, you know, Facebook and Twitter so much, and I come across like a book that is a YA book, and it was so triggering to me because it had a lot of romanticized abuse, sexy bad boy abuser tropes, which is actually prominent in YA literature, sadly, but it is prominent. And so I became so triggered by that I set about to write my own enemies to lovers fantasy that did not romanticize abuse. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. Well, and I ended up writing the book in 3 weeks in October, just 3 weeks, fastest I've ever written a book, 115,000 words. I basically was surviving off of 3 hours of sleep and was barely eating. I drank a ton of tea and water, and that was basically what I survived on for 3 weeks, and barricaded myself in my bedroom. And my husband, who was working from home since the pandemic, has been raising our girls the majority of the time as I write, which is amazing. He's very supportive, and he's much better at the kids than me. Yeah, these boys, I'm fine with these boys. So, but I embarked on an identity journey while writing it, and it became my own voices. It became a very healing work for me, and it technically could be considered a dystopia versus just a fantasy portal universe or alternate universe. It's actually a father of vampires came in, shifted tectonic plates, and organized the world into a full continental mass to maintain control over the races, and opened up the underworld so monsters are constantly spewing out. And that became my own voices work, and I got to inject a lot of my dark humor into it. A lot of fun. I have a lot of laughs writing it. Reality and LGBTQI affirming, which was so freeing for me because I spent decades in a religious cult, and gave me the courage to finally come out as bisexual. So yeah, so it was quite a journey. It was in just 4 weeks, and the sequel was 120,000 words, and then at 140,000 words. Progress. It's currently at 75,000 long and in the process of burying. And so the pandemic adversely affected me personally and my writing at first. But then big sun came out of all of the shaft of clouds at the end. So yes, so the bad situation turned it into something good.
Okay. So let's go around. We'll start with I'll start and then we'll go around again. I want to
Everybody
just
got really quiet.
close out by yeah. I just want to close out by everyone telling where we can find you because everyone, I'm sure this is a media age. Everyone's got media somewhere. You can find me at ajmullican.com. If you go ajmullican.com/author, you can find all my links to the social medias. Most of it is at AJ Mullican. Surprise, surprise. Theresa, where can we find you?
You can find me at theresaHauthor.com. And then I'm on all the social medias, Theresa Halvorsen author. I'm there. You can find me. Find me on Facebook. That's where I hang out the most.
Okay, Alex.
You can find me at alexgzarate.com. I am on every social media, whether popular or not. Alex Gizerati. I have a podcast. I have YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I'm in there. You can find me there. My latest book is out, and I am on Amazon.
Okay, Stephen.
I'm at www.stephenpearl.com. That's Stephen with a PH. I'm also put my name into Google. I own the first couple of pages, and I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Pinterest. So, and I have an Amazon page.